Everyone pictures the same dream. Buy the club, lift the trophy, become a hero in a town that will love you forever. In December 2018, a 134-year-old English football club was sold for £1. 8 months later, it no longer existed. Here is what this actually costs. Start with the purchase price itself, and it swings by orders of magnitude depending on where you're buying in. A National League or League Two club can change hands for £500,000 to £5 million. A League One club typically costs £20 million or less. Move up to the Championship and the number jumps hard. Aston Villa sold for £76 million in 2016, and that was in their first season outside the Premier League. Premier League ownership starts in the hundreds of millions. Liverpool changed hands for £435 million in 2007, and Fenway Sports Group later paid £300 million just to take the club out of that deal's wreckage. Then come the hidden regulatory costs nobody prices into the dream. Every prospective owner must pass the league's owners and directors test before a deal can even close. Academies are licensed in tiers, and running a top-tier academy costs millions of pounds a year just to maintain accreditation, regardless of whether a single player from it ever plays a first-team minute. Move up through the divisions, and your stadium has to meet minimum ground grading standards, seating capacity, floodlighting, safety certification, and clubs promoted without a compliant ground have been forced into 6- and 7-figure emergency construction just to be allowed to play in their new division. Add the purchase price, academy licensing, ground compliance, and the working capital needed to survive a season before broadcast money arrives, and a serious push into the Championship or Premier League routinely requires north of £50 million to £100 million in year one alone, before a single trophy is within reach. Wages exist because players are the product, and they dominate the cost base like nothing else in this industry. The Premier League's aggregate wage-to-revenue ratio sat at 64 to 65% across 2023/24 and 2024/25, according to Deloitte, meaning for every pound a club earns, roughly 65 pence goes straight to payroll before anything else is paid. Transfer amortisation is its own recurring cost. Clubs spread a transfer fee across the length of a player's contract rather than expensing it in 1 year, which is why Chelsea became the first Premier League club in history to cross £200 million in amortisation charges in a single season. Agent fees are paid in cash, immediately, regardless of amortisation schedules. Premier League clubs paid a combined £409.1 million to agents and intermediaries in the year to February 2025, according to Football Association figures. Non-player costs, administration, matchday operations, travel, medical staff, stadium maintenance, have grown too. Other operating expenses as a share of Premier League revenue climbed from 19.8% in 2018-19 to 27.7% by 2024/25. Insurance for a squad of professional athletes runs into millions annually, covering injury, loss of form, and third-party liability at a level no ordinary retail business needs to consider. Stack wages at roughly 65% of revenue, other operating costs near 28%, agent fees, and amortization, and a typical club is committing more than 90 pence of every pound in revenue before it has covered a single non-football overhead. Here's where the dream gets thin. Premier League clubs generated a combined £3.4 billion in broadcast revenue in 2024/25, and total league revenue across all 20 clubs reached roughly £6.3 billion the season before, according to Deloitte. Split unevenly, the Big Six alone captured close to £3.5 billion of that, but even the bottom 3 clubs in 2024/25 still banked over £100 million each. Leicester City took home £116.9 million, Ipswich Town £111.1 million, Southampton £109.2 million, largely from broadcast distribution alone. Multiply that revenue by the cost stack from Section 2, and the picture flips fast. Wages alone consume 65 pence of every pound. Other operating costs take another 28 pence. Once agent fees and amortization are layered on top, the league's aggregate adjusted EBITDA fell to just £573 million in 2024/25, an operating margin of only 8.4% across the entire Premier League combined. That's the punchline. A league generating £6 billion plus a year, and the collective operating margin barely clears 8 cents on the dollar. For most clubs outside the top six, that margin is thinner still, and one bad season can wipe it out entirely. That 8% margin assumes you stay in the league that pays it. One relegation changes everything. Relegation from the Premier League is the single event that destroys football club economics faster than any other. Academic research covering the 2005 to 2022 period found that relegated clubs suffered a 73% average reduction in revenue in their first season back in the Championship, a figure only partly softened to 42% by parachute payments. Wage spending, by contrast, only fell by 28% over the same period, meaning costs don't retreat anywhere near as fast as income does. The real-world version of that math: Huddersfield Town's revenue fell from £119.1 million in 2018-19 to £52.7 million in 2019-20, a 56% collapse in a single season. After their relegation from the Premier League, parachute payments exist precisely because this cliff edge is so severe. Relegated clubs now receive roughly £49 million in year one, dropping to around £40 million in year two, and £18 million in year three, a total package worth over £100 million spread across 3 years, and clubs still end up tens of millions of pounds worse off. In 2018, one 134-year-old club sold for the price of a coffee. Within 8 months, its entire professional history was over. Bury Football Club was founded in 1885, won the FA Cup twice, and had just been promoted to League One in May 2019 after finishing second in League Two. On the pitch, the club was on the way up. Off the pitch, years of debt accumulated under previous owner Stuart Day, much of it tied to stadium redevelopment plans, had left the club close to insolvency. In December 2018, Day sold Bury to businessman Steve Dale for £1. By mid-2019, this reported debts exceeded £9.7 million, including close to £1 million in unpaid tax. A High Court winding-up petition was only dismissed after Dale proposed a company voluntary arrangement with creditors, a deal that automatically triggered a 12-point deduction under EFL insolvency rules. Bury then missed the league's deadline to prove it had the funds to cover its debts. A last-minute takeover bid from a firm called CNN Sporting Risk collapsed on 27 August 2019, and that same day, the EFL expelled Bury from the league, the first club expulsion from English professional football since 1992. This was not a squad that underperformed. Bury had just won promotion. This was a debt structure built on stadium borrowing and a £1 ownership handover that neither the club nor the league's financial rules could absorb. Industry structure, not incompetence on the pitch. Here's a cost that rarely shows up the way it should on a projection: agent fees. Because transfer fees are amortized over a contract's length, a £30 million signing on a 5-year deal looks like a manageable £6 million annual charge on the books. But the agent fee attached to that same deal, commonly 5 to 10% of the transaction value, is paid in cash, up front, in the same transfer window. Walk through a real transaction. A club signs a player for £30 million on a 5-year contract. On paper, the amortization charge of £6 million a year looks entirely sustainable against a £150 million revenue base. But the agent fee on that deal can run £2 million to £3 million, paid immediately, in cash, in a single window, alongside every other signing that same summer. Premier League clubs paid £409.1 million combined to agents in the year to February 2025, up from £272.6 million just 3 years earlier, a nearly 50% increase in agent spending in 3 years, growing faster than almost any other cost category in the sport. There is another cost growing just as fast, except this one isn't paid to a person. It's triggered by a rule book, and it can cost more than any transfer fee ever has. Premier League profit and sustainability rules cap losses at £105 million over a rolling 3-year period. In November 2023, Everton were docked 10 points, later reduced to 6 on appeal, for breaching that threshold by £19.5 million. Months later, a second, separate breach of £16.6 million cost them 2 more points in the same season. That's 8 points lost in a single campaign for financial breaches alone. Nottingham Forest were docked 4 points the same season after admitting a breach of £34.5 million against their allowable loss threshold. A points deduction isn't a fine that gets absorbed into next year's budget. It moves a club directly toward the relegation zone in real time, threatening the exact £100 million plus in broadcast revenue, described in Section 3. A club can field a title-worthy squad, win enough matches to stay up on merit, and still go down because of a spreadsheet error from 2 accounting years earlier. This can end the business in a single event. Some things get better at scale. The Big Six alone command close to £1.5 billion of the Premier League's roughly £2 billion in total commercial revenue, and a larger overall revenue base gives bigger clubs more room to absorb a bad transfer or a down season without breaching PSR thresholds. Access to Champions League broadcast money compounds the gap further every year a club stays qualified. But other things get harder, not easier. Bigger wage bills mean bigger fixed multi-year commitments that don't shrink if results slip. Agent fee obligations scale directly with transfer activity. The more a club spends to compete, the more it owes in cash the same summer. And regulatory scrutiny intensifies with size. Manchester City have faced over 100 alleged financial rule breaches under investigation since 2023, a scale of scrutiny a League Two club will never encounter, precisely because there's more money to investigate. At a certain size, a football club stops being a sports team and becomes a global media and commercial rights business that also happens to field 11 players on a Saturday. Optimistic scenario. A mid-table Premier League club earns £180 million in total revenue, keeps wages disciplined at 60% of revenue, £108 million, and holds other operating costs to 25%, or £45 million. Total cost base, £153 million against £180 million in revenue, leaving a genuine £27 million operating margin before amortisation and agent fees. The club stays up comfortably and banks another season at this level. Realistic scenario, the same club is relegated. Revenue collapses toward parachute payment territory. Call it £80 million in year 1, following the 73% cliff edge pattern from Section 4. But wage spending only falls by roughly 28%, per the research, leaving a wage bill still near £78 million against that £80 million in revenue. Agent fees on existing contracts are still owed regardless of division. A PSR breach becomes a live risk simply because revenue fell while committed spending didn't. Recalculate, and that £27 million profit is now a loss running into the tens of millions. The difference between those two scenarios is one relegation battle, one PSR miscalculation, and one summer of aggressive agent fee-heavy spending. None of these are exotic disasters. All three happen to someone in this industry every single season. Research from Sheffield Hallam University found that championship clubs without parachute payment support operate on average revenues of around £20 million a season, while clubs cushioned by parachute payments pull in £33 million or more, a structural gap that has nothing to do with squad quality and everything to do with financial starting position. The primary cause of collapse in this industry is almost never poor coaching. It's a debt or wage structure that can't survive one bad season, exactly as it played out at Barry. Survivors share specific habits. They keep the wage-to-revenue ratio meaningfully below the PSR threshold, not hovering at the edge of it. They treat agent fees as an immediate cash flow line item, not something amortization quietly hides. They build revenue that doesn't depend on Premier League broadcast money alone, commercial deals, academy sales, a diversified fan base. They avoid funding stadium or infrastructure projects through owner personal borrowing that can be called in overnight, the exact failure mode that ended Barry. And they write relegation clauses into player contracts so that wages fall automatically the moment broadcast revenue does, rather than staying fixed against a collapsed income base. That trophy-lifting dream is real. Somewhere, this season, an owner will get to hold one up. So is the £1 sale price of a 134-year-old football club, and the 8 months it took for that club to stop existing entirely. Owning a football club isn't buying a trophy chase. It's managing a 65% wage business, one relegation, one rule breach, or one bad transfer window away from a cliff edge with your name on it. If this kind of numbers-first breakdown is useful, subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming.